The first time Maris Wren found the cuts on Sorghum, the old dun-colored donkey blinked at her with puzzled amber eyes, as if apologizing for a trouble he could not name. It was dawn at the far edge of Briar Steppe, where the prairie sloped into a tangle of thorn, salt cedar, and cottonwood. The air smelled of sage bruised under boots and cold iron from the water trough. Blood gathered in thin beads along Sorghum's right flank, neat lines, not long, but deliberate. Like someone had written a message on him and then wiped the letters away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Maris pressed a rag against the oozing lines and spoke low so her voice would not carry. Easy, boy. Sorghum leaned into her shoulder the way he did when storms rolled across the flats. He trusted her. Everyone else would say he was just a donkey, a pasture fixture for the goats to feel braver around, but Sorghum had been there when the blizzard took her father in the south pasture, had brayed until a neighbor heard and found Maris half buried in drift and grief. He had a way of being where the pain lived. The cuts weren't from wire. Barbed scratches left ragged kisses and caught hair. These were clean and narrow, almost surgical, arranged in parallel like tally marks left by a patient hand. The sight made something cold crawl up the inside of Maris's ribs. She cleaned the wounds with diluted iodine, the sting making Sorghum's hide twitch. The goats clustered at the fence to watch, hooves ticking on the board like a jittery metronome. A prairie hawk rode a slice of wind above the cottonwoods, the morning light coppering its chest as it pivoted. All of it, the hawk, the goats, the hush before heat, felt normal. Only the lines were wrong. She followed a habit she'd learned from her father: when something is wrong, look for the second wrong thing. The latch on the side gate had grit rubbed into its pin, as if someone with gloved hands had twisted it in the night. The ground just outside showed scuffed soil, not quite boot prints but a suggestion of weight. She kneeled, picked a crescent of dark from the dirt, and found a sliver of black rubber, thin, like the edge of a bicycle inner tube, or the skirt of a rain slicker. "Who comes out here in the dark?" she asked Sorghum. The donkey flicked an ear, accepting a piece of apple, licking iodine from his lip with a grimace. By noon the heat laid a heavy hand across the pasture. Maris walked fence line with needle-nose pliers and wire clips, touching every staple like she was reading Braille. No missing wires. No sagging pole. The creek that cut the back acreage had dropped into a thread of brown water, coyote tracks stippled along its edges. She crouched and listened. Across the flats, the state highway sang faintly, a high guitar string nobody ever plucked. Ranches here were spaced like lonely thoughts, miles between houses, miles between help. In town, folks called Maris stubborn the way they called the wind breezy, as if naming a force softened it. "You should sell, girl," Pete Calder had told her at the feed store when the bank letters started arriving last winter. "Your daddy got himself drowned in debt before the blizzard took him. No shame in letting Briar Steppe go." "Briar Steppe stays," she'd said. She did not raise her chin when she said it. She didn't need to. Her father had left her a poor ranch and a good name, and she was determined to keep one of those. By evening the cuts on Sorghum had puckered clean and pale. She bedded him in the pole barn, switched the old radio to a station out of Abilene that told long stories between old songs, and sat on an overturned bucket with a thermos of coffee, watching dust drift through the slanted light. When darkness came, she closed the barn, walked back to the house through the yard of creaking cottonwoods, and tried to imagine a reason for those tidy wounds that did not involve a person. Coyotes nip, dogs tear, cats rake. This was none of those. And the second wrong thing, the grit in the latch, she couldn't scrub that from her mind. She slept badly. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the neat parallel lines, saw a hand making them, careful and patient, as if measuring. At graylight she pulled on her boots and went straight to the barn. More lines. This time on Sorghum's rump, for short incisions spaced with the kind of exactness no animal would bother with. She swore, softly and without heat, the way her father had taught her, words used to let out pressure, not to burn. "All right," she told Sorghum. "This ends tonight." She called Dr. Anna Doss at the clinic. Anna was younger than Maris by 3 years and already had a look to her that said she had outrun her hometown 3 times and chose to circle back anyway. When she arrived, the donkey pressed his head into her chest, utterly betrayed. Anna clicked her tongue, worked neatly with saline and lidocaine, and said, "These are made with something sharp and narrow. Blade or scalpel? See the edges?" Maris did not want to see. She wanted to stand in a world where no one came to hurt beasts in the dark. But she looked. The wound lips were clean as paper. Could it be some kind of ritual thing? Anna asked, then immediately winced at her own words. God, sorry. I mean, kids. Tick-tock, dares. Kids don't walk 3 miles down a dirt road at 2 in the morning to slice a donkey like a pie, Maris said, quieter than she felt. Not out here. Anna nodded. Then it's someone who knows the place, or doesn't care how far it is. They walked the fence line together. Anna pointed to the cottonwoods. If someone came from the creek bed, the trees would hide them. You can park off the highway at the culvert and walk in. Flashlight under the chin, low. No one would see. Maris tasted metal at the back of her tongue. Imagining the shape of it, the stride of a stranger under starlight, made her palms damp. Anna squeezed her shoulder as if reading that thought. Set a game cam. 2, if you can. I've got one I can lend. And, Maris, lock your doors. That evening, after Anna left in a rattle of gravel, Maris drove the old Ford into town. She bought 2 trail cameras, the kind that sent photos to your phone if you fed them a data plan. The cashier was a teen with a strip of blue hair at his temple, a kid who had made peace with the fact that there were only 3 places to work in Briar Step and the ranch supply wasn't the worst. He rang up the cameras without looking at her much, then said as he handed them over, "You be careful, Miss Wren. Heard coyotes were bad this year." "Coyotes don't buy scalpels," she said. The boy looked like he might puke. "Forget I said that." On the way home she passed the old Hargill place. The clapboard house had peeled down to gray curls, and the barn leaned like a drunk who refused to fall. Folks said the Hargills left because their well turned sour. Others said they left because their boy came back from prison with a stare that would not land on anything human. Maris had never cared for the talk. What mattered was that the lane to the Hargill gate also cut toward the creek that met her back acreage. If someone were coming from the highway, from the culvert like Anna said, the Hargill track was a good place to hide a truck. She slowed. Dust rose behind her in a long, rose-colored flag. The track was empty. At the culvert a barn owl heaved its pale body into the air, ghost white against the olive dusk, and slid away over the mesquite like a ship. That night, she mounted cameras, one facing the gate and one inside the barn, high in the rafters where the swallows built their mud thimbles. She baited the camera's sense of motion with a dangling ribbon cut from an old checkered shirt. Then she dragged the hay bales to make a wall behind Sorghum's stall so that if someone came, they could not lead him out without noise. She set her father's .410 shotgun on the workbench and ran a cleaning cloth through its barrel. The forearm wood was worn to velvet where his hand had lived. He used to say a gun in the hand is noisier than 2 in the safe because it puts a noise in your head, and he was right. Just holding it made Maris feel like a bell someone had struck with a soft mallet, tuned, alert. When midnight rolled itself over the ranch, Maris clicked off the barn radio, kissed Sorghum between his eyes, and went to the house. She did not undress. She checked the camera app. Static. She set the phone face down on the table so light would not bloom. Wind climbed the cottonwoods and made a sound like river water pouring slow. At 2:11 a.m., the phone buzzed. She did not gasp. She did not curse. She simply rose and went still, the way a deer goes still before deciding between flight and fight. Then she picked up the phone and looked. An image from the barn camera, black and white and grainy. The angle caught the stall door, the edge of Sorghum's neck, the corner of the hay bales. In the leftmost slice of the frame, a blur that might have been a moth, or might have been the shoulder of a person sliding past the lens. Maris whispered, "You son of a," and then cut the thought in half. She turned off the house lights, lifted the shotgun, and stepped out into the night. The air had cooled. The stars were hard and bright as nails. The moon, late and clipped, stood on the horizon like a coin in a slot. Gravel under her boots said small, honest things. She moved past the cottonwoods, past the windmill that didn't spin anymore but still complained in the throat when the gusts pushed it, and toward the barn. A strip of orange light banded the crack below the big sliding door. She had left it dark. Someone, was inside. Every lesson her father had given her about meeting a stranger at night came up out of her bones like old heat. Don't walk straight. Circle. Make the ground talk for you. Make the building talk for them. She cut wide around the paddock and came up on the barn's back wall, where the boards gapped between knots. She looked through a hole the size of a coin. Sorghum's ears were forward, then swiveling, trying to source two sounds at once, the small hush of something moving and the smaller sound of breath. That someone else's breathing, fast, contained, was the first thing Maris heard. The second was a whisper of fabric. She slid to the corner and stared down the narrow lane between the barn and the lean-to. A shadow moved. Not an animal. A person in a hooded jacket, shoulders hunched, something hanging from one hand that whittled at the air like a pendulum. Maris called, low and even, "You picked the wrong ranch." The figure jerked. The item in their hand, a knife, caught the light a second, a pale fish flash, and vanished against cloth. They did not run. They turned their head toward her, slow, until she felt the weight of a gaze come down like a hand placed on her shoulder. "Drop it," she said. The person inhaled, loud. Then they turned back toward the donkey stall. She stepped faster than she thought she could, boots whispering through hay chaff as she cut across the back door and slid it open. The roller wheels rasped metal on metal. Sorghum brayed once, a sound that bent up in the middle and split her heart. Inside, the barn light was a yellow ache. Dust hung in it like water. The person stood at the stall door with one foot on the lower crosspiece, the other planted wide, as if bracing. The hood hid their face. Their jacket looked cheap enough to flare if you breathed on it, something bought at the gas station rack where they keep batteries and last-minute cold weather regrets. "Drop it," Maris said again. The shotgun was steady in her hands, but she felt the up-tilt in her own breath and made it go away by will. "Turn around." They did not turn. They lifted their hand, and she saw the shape clearly now, not a simple knife, not a hunting blade, but a scalpel with a long handle, the kind used to reach and slice with detachment. It made the light thin along its edge. She moved 3 steps closer. "You slice my donkey again and I will put you down." "Can't," the person said. The voice was young, not a child's exactly, but not grown into its full weight. A voice that had not learned how to lie smoothly yet. It was also wrong in another way Maris couldn't place until the figure spoke again. "Can't stop. It's for taking." "It's for... For what?" The head tilted, as if puzzled at her question. "For learning." Sorghum stepped backward until his rump touched the hay bales. He didn't kick. He froze and closed his eyes, a donkey trick she'd seen before, refusing to see what he could not handle. Maris felt rage as a clean blue line, not hot, not sloppy. Her finger tightened along the trigger guard. "Turn around." The figure sighed, set the scalpel's tip against the stall board, and drew it along the grain, making a new pale line in old wood. Then they turned. The hood shadowed the face. The light limned a chin narrow as a spoon, a mouth bitten white. The eyes in the shadow did not meet hers so much as pull through her, like hooks thrown past a fish to snag whatever came after. She could not read any of the expected things, fear, defiance, calculation. Only a flatness, a calm so deep it registered as a kind of vacancy. "Why my animal?" she asked. "Why here?" The mouth made a shape that might have been a smile from farther away. Up close it wasn't any expression she knew. "Because it's quiet," the voice said. "And you think that means safe for you?" "Safe for the work." "What work?" "The measuring." Maris swallowed against the cotton in her throat. "You a vet tech?" A student? Say your name. No answer. She lifted the barrel half an inch. Say your name. Names aren't for night. The room felt smaller than it was. The dust thickened until every breath made a film in the mouth. Somewhere outside, the owl landed on the windmill vane, metal squealing a greeting or a complaint. It was hard to tell the difference in the dark. Go out the door, Maris said. Hands where I can see them. The figure shook their head. You'll stop the quiet. It doesn't belong to you. They made a small humming sound, like an attempt to find a note nobody else heard, and then took a step closer to Sorghum instead of the door. The donkey did not move, but his ears turned to paper on his skull. Maris moved into the stall mouth, blocking the body from the animal. Up close, the scalpel's blade trembled a little in the figure's hand, not with fear, with a musician's impatience before a crescendo. Last time, she said. Go. Can't, they whispered. It has to be this one. He has the right lines. Lines? They lifted the scalpel and used it to draw invisible geometry in the air over Sorghum's side, little rectangles, a cross-hatched map. This pattern took forever to find, the voice said softly, like a lover entranced. You don't even know what he is. He's a donkey, Maris said. Mine. The figure's head cocked. Yours is a word for day. At night, things belong to what they're made for. You slice him again and you'll belong to the sheriff. She wished, hard, that she could call. But there were 2 bars of service out here on a good day, and it was not a good night. They smiled, if that's what it was, and lowered the blade a fraction. There is no sheriff for this. Try me. Maris kept the shotgun steady and reached with her left hand toward the barn light switch. If she cut the light, maybe the figure would lose nerve, or at least lose precision. She found the toggle with her fingertips and flicked it down. Darkness poured, thick and sudden. Sorghum blew air through his nose, an earthquake in miniature. In the dark, sound got taller, her own pulse, the figure's breath, the soft slide of a blade being raised again. Maris took one step, feeling the stall threshold under her boot heel. She did not want to fire in the dark. A .410 pellets would ricochet off board and beam and find things they did not deserve. She set the barrel low, intending to strike the figure's wrist with the stock if she had to. The phone in her back pocket vibrated, another motion alert from the camera. The tiny buzz sounded enormous in the black and she hated it for that. The figure whispered, close enough now that she could feel breath cool the sweat on her neck. This is the part where you step aside. Not tonight, she said. Then I'll go through. The voice was so calm that for one terrified heartbeat Maris imagined the person not as a stranger but as an instrument, a thing with a task wound into it like spring steel. Her skin prickled as if 1,000 ants had decided she was a hill. She stepped to meet the movement she felt more than saw. The stock of the shotgun came up. It met something soft, a wrist, a forearm, with a thunk that traveled into her own bones. A small sound, half pain, half surprise, left the hood. The scalpel flashed white once as it spun from a hand that had expected compliance and found refusal instead. Back, Maris said, every muscle standing at attention. Back, or I. Something clanged against the rafters, metal on metal. The scalpel had hit the light chain and knocked it into motion. The chain swung like a clock pendulum, and the light, still off, ticked against the bulb. In the afterimage of that tiny movement, Maris saw 2 things at once, the silhouette of the figure poised to surge, and another shape, tall, motionless, in the barn doorway beyond. A second person. Watching. The hair lifted on Maris's arms as if the night itself had hands. She felt rather than saw the first figure shift weight to launch. Stop, she said to the dark, to both shapes, to herself. The scalpel chain clicked. The light stayed off. Sorghum trembled behind her, his body a wall of warm earth. The watching shape in the doorway did not move. It had the patience of something that had already considered every outcome and chosen to wait through them all. Who are you? Maris asked, and hated how the question sounded like a plea. No answer. But the doorway shape turned, just enough that the outside starlight traced an outline, brimmed hat, long coat, a presence that did not match the cheap hood in front of her. Old, and patient, and interested. The first figure moved. Maris drove her shoulder forward and felt cloth and bone and a burst of breath meet her weight. They tumbled against the stall door. Wood barked her elbow. The scalpel skittered somewhere, it did not matter where, everything narrowed to the heat and insistence of the body grappling with hers. "Get out," she grunted. "Get out, or I swear." A hand found her braid and wrenched. Pain arced through her scalp and rang in her teeth. She slammed the shotgun's stock backward and made contact enough to win the space of one breath. In that inch of darkness she took the safety off by feel. "Don't," said the voice from the doorway, calm, low, shaped like command more than request. "Whoever you are," Maris said, "you don't get to." The doorway figure lifted one hand. Something small struck the stall wall and burst in a halo of sour scent, ammonia, sharp enough to turn the air into knives. For a second Maris's eyes stung so hard tears boiled up without shame. She staggered, blind, feeling the donkey's flank and the scrape of wood. The first figure slid past her like a fish, nimble, sudden. For an instant the shoulder brushed her chest and she felt a humming there, as if some engine ran inside the body that had nothing to do with lungs or heart. She seized at fabric and caught the edge of the hood, tore it, and a spill of hair came free, short, coarse, not a style so much as a collision with scissors. The face turned, and though the ammonia burned her eyes, she saw enough to know two truths she did not want. The face was younger than she'd thought, and it was not unfamiliar. "Wait," she said, astonished by the word, by the shape it made of her mouth. "You're—" The figure was gone into the black, a shadow pulled through a crack. Footsteps scratched along the back wall and out into the night. The doorway presence still stood, patient as stone. The ammonia faded like a bad idea. "Move away from the animal," the doorway voice said. It had an old river in it, a drawl that had been polished smooth by time elsewhere and rolled home like a coin returned to a pocket. "State your name," Maris said, teeth in the words. The shotgun was still up, though her hands remembered her father and wanted to lower it the way children want to crawl back into bed and forget. No name came. Only this: you should not have stepped between the pattern and the blade. "Come closer," she said, "and see how many steps I have left." A pause. "Then, I'll do better. I'll let you see me." The hand on the chain tugged. The bulb flared to life, a sudden white burn that chased the shapes back into bodies. In the doorway stood a man in a canvas coat that had seen better years, a black hat with a brim curled by weather, and a face that looked assembled from every county where drought had set a place hard. His eyes were pale in the way some blues are pale, like washed denim left too many summers on a line. He did not bring his hands up. He did not lower them either. He simply offered his face to the light, steady and sure, as if he had paid for it and kept the receipt. Maris's stomach fell the way it does when a ladder gives one rung and then catches. She knew him. Or rather, she knew who he was like a body knows a storm before the radar rolls it in. "You're trespassing," she said. Her voice sounded more like her father's than she wanted. "I'm here to make sure the work is done right," he said. "You don't want it done sloppy." The words made no room in her head where reason would stick. "The work," she repeated. "Cutting my animal in the dark." His gaze flicked to sorghum and back. "Not cutting. Marking." "For what?" He took one measured step into the barn, and for the first time she saw his hands, scabbed knuckles, a thin white scar across the lifeline left palm. "Not fresh. Old." "For what's coming," he said, and the way he said it told her he believed it was not a threat or a promise but a fact he had laid a bet on long ago. "Say your name," she said, and the barrel of the shotgun made its own demand. He did not give it. Instead he gave something worse. "Your daddy would have known me," he said. "He kept books I keep copies of." The air went colder than night had any right to make it. "You knew my father. We traded favors. Back when a blizzard wasn't the only thing that took a man down." Liar. But the word didn't feel like a fit. Too small. Too thin for the shape of him and the weight of how he stood under her roof like a man who had an old deed in his pocket. He glanced past her to the stall door where the scalpel had carved its pale line. "That one's got a cleaner hand than I did at his age," he said. "But he's impatient. That's why you're bleeding in your scalp and he's not." "His," she said. "So you'll admit it." "A boy, then." The face burned behind her eyes, the strange vacancy, the way the words didn't stick. Names at night are expensive. Before Maris could answer, Sorghum shifted, and the old donkey did something he never did for anyone but her. He pressed his nose against the side of the stranger's coat as if testing a memory. The man did not flinch, did not reach to stroke or shove. He simply stood and let the donkey measure him. "Step away," Maris said, but it came out softer. A thread pulled once across cloth, not torn yet. The man's eyes left Sorghum and found hers. "You think I want that animal hurt?" he asked, and something like anger, thin, precise, touched the edges of his voice at last. "You think I'd let a boy carve without purpose? I think you walked into my barn like a ghost that thinks it owns bodies." He smiled, not kindly. "I walked in like a man who knows what patterns hold and which ones break." He angled his head toward the scalpel's pale mark on wood. "This place has been making lines longer than you've been alive. Cottonwood rows, fence wire, creek braids. You either pay attention to how they cross or you learn the hard way why they were drawn." "What do you want?" she said, "besides to hear yourself talk like a sermon that forgot where church is?" He considered that and seemed to enjoy it. "I want you to let him finish. One more night. No more than that." She laughed, a single arrow that hit nothing and fell. "You want me to step aside and let a boy slice my donkey so he can complete his pattern?" He nodded, solemn as weather. "Then we leave. And this land holds." "From what?" He looked toward the cottonwoods as if meaning lived out there like a fox hiding in scrub. "From the thing that's coming up through the creek bed. The creek is dry. Not that kind of thing." He returned his gaze. "You'll call me mad. Most do right before they change their minds." Maris stared at him until the white in her eyes ached. The spot on her scalp where the braid had been yanked throbbed. The old radio sat silent on the shelf like a witness who had decided to plead the fifth. "You leave," she said. "Both of you. If you set one foot on my place again." "You'll shoot," he finished. "You won't. Not for this. Try me." He took another slow step. The distance between them folded in half without touching. Sorghum lifted his head and set it back down as if making a private decision. "You don't know what you don't know," the man said softly. "But you will. After tonight, you will." He reached into his coat pocket. Maris's finger curled hard against the trigger. He stopped, palm open, and pulled out, not a knife, not a gun, but a small leather notebook bound with twine. He set it on the workbench and stepped back. "Your father wrote better than he spoke," he said. "You'll want to read the pages with the pressed juniper. My father didn't keep notebooks." Even as she said it, she felt the lie curl its lip at her. Of course he did. He kept everything. Receipts, seeds, weather. He wrote the days like somebody might need them later. "Take it," the man said. "And then decide whether you'll keep us out or keep worse things out by letting us draw the lines they can't cross." The barn hummed with the old light's heat. The smell of iodine and hay and ammonia braided in a way that felt like a memory that had not yet happened. "Go," she said. "Now." He tipped his hat, not like a gentleman, but like a mechanic who had ducked the hood and found the engine would start. "We'll be at the Hargill Lane," he said. "We won't step on your dirt again until you call." "I won't call." "You will." His pale eyes warmed half a degree. "Because you're your father's daughter. And he was the only man I ever met who could see a line before it was drawn." He stepped backward into the square of night. His shadow folded, then disappeared. Silence fell like a quilt. Sorghum pressed his head into her shoulder and breathed her in, slow and damp, the way he did after rain. Maris set the shotgun on safe and lowered it to the straw. Her hands shook only a little. She picked up the notebook. The leather was stiff with age, the twine had been tied by a hand that did not hurry. She slid a fingernail under the knot and felt, absurdly, like she was prying up the lid of a coffin. Pages whispered. Smell rushed up, pencil, old glue, the crushed green of dried juniper. On the third page a sprig had left its ghost, a faint brown shadow of itself. Beneath it, in her father's square-jawed hand, a line of words, if it comes again, draw the donkey first. Her scalp prickled. Her father never wrote poems or riddles. He wrote feed weights, rainfall inches, diesel expenses that always outpaced hope. But there were more words under that, and they did not belong to the man who taught her the names of every grass on the steppe. January 12th, lines hold the quiet. Break them and the creek takes the fence, takes the barn, takes the house. Keep the quiet. February 3rd, boy from Hargill sees more than he should. Good hands. Bad patience. February 21st, if the water starts singing, don't sing back. Her mouth went dry. The barn, the light, the night, all of it tipped a degree to the left without moving. She flipped further. Names she knew, neighbors, fields, met words that had no business sharing a page with them, circle, interlock, keep, destroy, bind. Her father's handwriting bent into someone else's language. Damn you, she whispered to the empty air where the man had stood, and to the fuller air where her father's ghost now seemed to stand, too. Damn both of you. Sorghum shifted. The old donkey made a sound then that he never made except in storms, a long, low brain that carried worry in it like a river carries silt. Maris shut the notebook. She set it on the workbench next to the radio. She checked the doors, the windows, the camera app. 10 new images, dust. An elbow. The flash-white bloom of the ammonium salt. The streak of a body leaving. She turned off the barn light again, not because she wanted the dark, but because she wanted to feel it settle the way a heavy blanket settles on a restless child. In that darkness she felt the notebook at her back like a heat source. All right, she told the donkey. We'll do this my way. She fetched a camping chair and a thermos. She set them in the stall mouth and sat with her knees up and the shotgun laid across them like a lap dog made of iron. She let her eyes learn the dark until the shapes made honest introductions of themselves, beam, chain, bucket, breath. The night moved in small ways, wing, leaf, shifting hoof. Somewhere far on the flats a truck crossed the state line like a ship cutting the edge of a map. The cottonwoods clacked a prayer in their leaves. Time lengthened and thinned until it felt like thread pulled from a sweater, tensile, inevitable. At 3:07 a.m., the creek sang. Not water, there was none to sing with. Not wind, no breeze moved. It was a thin, silver noise that threaded up from the cottonwoods and slipped into the barn as if carried by hands. It sounded like a spoon drawn around the rim of a glass, like a glass drawn around the rim of a bigger glass. It sounded like a human voice if the human was far away and under something heavy. It said nothing words could catch, and it said it on a pitch that made the small muscles behind her ears clench. Sorghum trembled so hard his halter creaked. Maris's hands went colder than the chain. She did not stand. She did not call out. She let the sound go through her without giving it anything to hold. In the doorway there was nothing at all. Then there was a shadow. Not the man. Not the boy. A third shape, low and deliberate, sliding along the ground as if the floor tilted and it was obeying gravity in a direction she did not agree with. The sound from the creek sharpened, as if pleased with itself. Sorghum's breath tanged from hay to metal, the way panic turns the mouth into a coin. Not tonight, Maris said to the shape, to the sound, to her own fear. She stood. The shotgun came up of its own accord, hands remembering. The shape slid closer. It carried no light. It made no sound other than the creek's terrible whispering song that seemed to widen its mouth with every inch. Maris stepped forward once, twice, heart beating a message her mind refused to read. The shape gathered itself as if to leap, the way a shadow sometimes deepens before it takes a body. She tightened her finger and drew breath and felt the world tilt toward a moment it could not take back. The shape opened and inside it something gleamed, a long thin silver like a scalpel or a fish or a note held so true it hurt, and then, with a motion quicker than anything she had seen all night, it touched. Touched. Not sorghum at all, but the fresh pale groove the scalpel had left in the stall board. The contact made a sound like glass speaking to itself. The creek's thread song stuttered, as if confused, then swelled again, curious. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Maris didn't fire. Every nerve screamed to, but the gun would only scatter shot into wood and echo without hitting the kind of thing sound alone could name. The shape seemed to taste the new mark, to read it with a silver feeler. It shied as the grain pushed back, as if the line refused to let it pass. She understood then what the man had meant by patterns that hold and patterns that break. Not fully, understanding came like weather, first wind, then grit in the teeth, then the rain itself. But enough to step sideways, to put her body between sorghum and that sliding dark. Enough to feel the stall board hum under her hand as if tension strung through it from fence post to creek root. Not here, she said, voice low, even, the way one talks to a skittish animal or a memory that wants to run. Not through my marks. The shadow recoiled. It folded upon itself like fabric wrung of water, then flattened and poured toward the doorway. The creek's singing faltered, thin to thread, then to hair. For a long handful of breaths, nothing moved but the chain and the slow rise of sorghum's ribs. Maris's scalp throbbed where the braid had been yanked. Her eyes burned with the last of the ammonia. The shotgun weighed less than a minute ago and more than a lifetime. She eased forward and nudged the scalpel with the barrel. The blade winked in the dim like a sly thing, then settled. What the hell was that? She whispered, not as a question to the barn but as a record for the dark that had to be kept honest by naming. No answer came from the doorway. Wind pushed a leaf along the threshold. Somewhere far off, a truck coughed its way up the grade toward town. Okay, she told Sorghum, who trembled and then stilled because she had stilled. Okay. She found the chain, clicked the bulb to life, and winced. The light felt indecent after that kind of night. She picked up the scalpel, wrapped the blade in an oily rag, and slid it into her back pocket like a captured word. She did not sleep. Dawn came as if someone had turned the world's contrast down. The cottonwoods wore their gray mourning faces. The goats started their gossip. Sorghum leaned into her and exhaled the night from his lungs in one long sigh. Maris cleaned the stall line with iodine, not for the wood's sake but for her hands. Ritual mattered now, not because rituals were magic, but because they kept the body from shattering while the mind made room for new shapes of fear. By 8, she had coffee so strong it bit, eggs gone leathery in the skillet because she'd watched the back pasture instead of the pan, and the leather notebook open to the juniper page. January 14th, circle holds. Boy says the creek spoke. Told him to draw on me. Told him I was already lines I just hadn't seen. Full talk, but watch the water. February 24th, if it finds the gate with no mark, it doesn't knock. March 2nd, donkey first because donkey won't lie. Horse will run and goats will argue. Donkey stands and lets you know whether you found the right angle. She read and reread, the words going from nonsense to almost sense the way a far radio station comes into range between bursts of static and evangelists. Her father had never been mystical. He had built fences square, not circles. He'd laughed at people who talked about ley lines like veins in the dirt. But he had also been a weatherman, the old kind who could smell hail before radar drew its first pixel. Maybe this was the same muscle, flexed in a stranger way when the creek ran thin. Her phone buzzed. A message from Dr. Anna Doss, you alive? I've been thinking about those cuts and I hate that I have. Call me. Maris texted back, alive. Need you to swing by noon if you can. Bring antiseptic. And, bring whatever you bring when you think you might have to stitch a person who doesn't want the ER. A beat. Then Anna, you better be kidding. I'm not. But it's not me. The 3 dots pulsed for a long time. Okay. On my way at lunch. Lock your doors. Maris closed the notebook and slid it into her jacket. She stepped to the porch and looked toward the Hargill lane. Heat already made a mirage over that dirt. In the shimmer, a figure detached itself from the horizon and became the canvas-coated man, walking the way people do when they do not need the land's permission. She met him at the yard gate so he would not come any closer. You can talk from there. He tipped his head, not a nod, not a bow. You saw it take interest in the mark, he said. Not a question. I saw something I don't have words for. And I saw it didn't like wood that had been written on. It isn't the wood. It's the naming. He looked past her at the cottonwoods, at the windmill that hadn't spun since the drought year, at the creek bed cut like a healed scar through the pasture. Lines tell it where the world still remembers itself. You will say anything to make me let you cut my animal again, she said. Try better. His mouth twisted. Not annoyance. Not humor. Recognition. He's a donkey of uncommon nerve, he said. He'll hold when a horse will lunge. He'll stand where the river and the ground tugs. Which is why he's a good mark. But I told you last night, the boy's impatient. You have the look of a woman who will insist on the right hand doing the work. You mean me. I mean you. He folded weather-chewed hands on the top rail. If you draw, I teach. We finish before full dark. The creek will come nosing at what you do. If the angles hold, it will shy off. If they don't, we'll have to sing it down. I'm not singing to a dry creek with a stranger. He glanced toward the barn. You won't have to if you get the lines right. She hated that his words found purchase in her. She hated more that she wanted them to. The boy, she said. Who is he? No names. Then tell me if I've seen him at the feed store. At the clinic. At the Hargill place. He weighed her, then tossed her a stone truth. He was Hargill kin. The last of them still angry at the dirt for not being water. He's half broke by something he asked to learn too young. Too young for scalpels and midnight? Too young for the creek to answer. She leaned on the post opposite him as if that could balance the ledger between them. Why me? Because you stayed, he said simply. Everyone with sense leaves a place where the bank writes more letters than friends do. Everyone who doesn't leaves for different reasons. Some leave in place, sell their keeping to the bottle or the TV. You cut mesh out of goat hooves yourself at midnight and then get up to fix the hinge you thought you could ignore for one more week. You listen. You don't scare easy. And the land likes you. Maris looked at the cottonwoods because she could not look at him after that and maintain the scaffolding that held her anger straight. The leaves shimmered with a light wind, and for half a second she had the private, absurd sensation that the trees were listening back. My father, she said, not ready but past the point where ready mattered. What did he do for you? We traded, the man said. He had the steadiness from Marx and I had the ear. You need both unless you've got more luck than sense. What did you trade for? To keep the creek in its old bed. To keep it from remembering the way it ran before men taught it fences. He scratched at the scar on his palm. We kept it for 12 years that way. Until the winter the blizzard took him. Then he wasn't there to draw, and I wasn't here to sing. It remembered. Took the Hargill well the wrong direction. Ate the corner of their house. Folks called it a sinkhole. But nothing sinks here. It just lets go. The skin at the base of Maris's skull tightened like a knot that remembered being tied. If this is a story you tell to scare women into letting you cut their animals, it's working, she said dryly. But not in the way you want. I don't want you scared, he said. I want you stubborn with purpose. You still haven't said your name. He smiled with half his face. You won't use it. You'll use what I teach you. Names are for when things have to bind. We aren't binding anything. We're reminding it. Then we're wasting mourning, she said, surprising herself with the word we. They worked under shade. The man taught with quiet hands and a look that felt like compass more than gaze. He had her practice on a piece of barn board, long pull, short pull, lift before the grain takes you. Don't saw, he said. Slice like you want the wood to volunteer. He showed her how to stand so her shoulders didn't carry what her wrists should. He stopped her when impatience made her marks crowd. What happens if I crowd a line? She asked. It gets hungry, he said. You don't want hungry marks. Hungry marks invite what eats. She glanced at the scalpel. Who taught you? An old woman who kept bees in a county nobody outside its own county believed existed, he said, without looking up. She smelled like smoke and sugar all year. It was the kind of sentence that ought to have been too pretty to be used in daylight, but it landed in her ears like a nail in a good board. She kept working until the rhythm lived in her hand instead of in his voice. At noon Anna's truck pulled into the yard trailing grit like a veil. The doctor climbed out with a duffel and a look that said she'd already argued through 3 scenarios on the drive and lost them all to the one that required the most gauze. She stopped dead when she saw the stranger by the fence. Maris, she said carefully. Friend of yours? Something like, Maris said. He's teaching me to draw lines the creek won't cross. Anna did not blink. She had played poker in high school with boys who thought her face would tell them everything. She had learned very young to let it tell them nothing until they owed her money. And the scalpels? In my pocket, Maris said. She touched the wrapped bundle. New use for them. Anna's eyes softened when she looked at Sorghum. Let me see the wounds. She cleaned, redressed, and scolded gently in the way of friends who intend to stay friends. You should have called me last night. Phone buzzed, Maris said. But I was busy not dying. Anna's gaze slid to the man in back. And is that going to be an ongoing hobby? Hopefully not. We're going to finish something before dark. Anna straightened, wiped her hands, and considered the angles of noon. I can hang around. I brought lunch and a selfish amount of lemon bars. You should go, the man said, not unkindly. This isn't for more than 3 sets of eyes. Anna's chin tilted an 1/8 inch. Funny. I don't remember asking you. Maris put a hand on her friend's forearm. He's right. You believe him. I don't know what I believe. She thought of the shape testing the stall line. Of the creek's sudden singing. I know what I saw. Anna searched her face and then did the kind of gracious thing that keeps difficult friendships alive. She put trust where fear wanted to go. Okay. But I'm coming back at dusk with a reason to knock if you don't answer the door. What reason? Maris asked, and Anna's mouth thinned. The sheriff. And an ambulance. And probably a number of things that carry letters instead of lights. Maris swallowed. Come at dusk. If you hear singing. Do not, Anna said, surprising both of them with the heat in her voice. Finish that sentence. I am not listening to a creak for either of you. The man's washed denim eyes warmed by a fraction. Good doctor, he said. Keep your ears for the living. She left in a frown that could have been worry or anger or the kind of stubborn love that prefers better choices but will show up for the bad ones anyway. All afternoon, Maris practiced until the wood stopped splintering in complaint and started to accept the blade's logic. The man corrected as little as possible. When she reached for the scalpel with anger, he waited. When she reached with fear, he said, You aren't writing a warning. You're writing a boundary. There's a difference. When she reached with something like prayer, he nodded once. Better. What do I draw on him? She asked at last, nodding toward Sorghum, who dozed with his head low, the old donkey's ears taking turns being on duty. 2 long lines under the ribs, the man said, laying a finger just above where the hair swirled. Not deep. You're not carving meat. You're telling quiet where to live. He traced the air. Then a cross line at the hip, here, in the old road angle. And one at the shoulder in the creek angle. Don't touch the belly. That's not ours to ride on. What's the old road angle? The way the stage used to cut the flats before the highway taught folk to forget. He pointed west. You can still see it at sundown if dust gets up and the light lays right. They waited for evening. Heat lifted from the dirt like a rumor nobody could prove. A thunderhead pretended to gather over the far mesa and then decided not to. The cottonwoods clicked their dry tongues. The creek bed lay there, the color of old pennies and rattlesnakes, as if it had never held water or song. Now, he said as the sun stepped down behind the cottonwoods and made the yard into a long theater of shadows. If you want the angles to hold, you have to remember where you were when the blizzard took him. My father? The creek. He nodded at the dry gash through the pasture. It doesn't care about your grief. It cares about your steadiness when grief stood next to you. You have to be the girl who carried the rope and did not lie down in the drift. I did lie down, she said. For a minute. He didn't smile. Then be the one who got up. She didn't ask him how he knew. She set her palm against Sorghum's side where his coat felt like a woven thing more than hair. You trust me? She asked. The donkey leaned. That was yes. She cleaned the places. She breathed until her breath belonged to the board she'd cut on all afternoon rather than to the fear that wanted to make a home between her shoulders. Then she drew the first line. The scalpel bit and moved and lifted. Blood gathered in a thin bead and did not run. Sorghum flinched once and settled against her hand. The second line mirrored the first. Her hand shook and then didn't. The angle at the hip came stubborn, her wrist wanted to argue, until she remembered the old road, that diagonal the stage had taken to avoid a low spot that ate wheels in spring thaws. She adjusted a hair and the blade slipped as if the wood of the world had met it halfway. At the shoulder her father arrived, not as a ghost a man sees in movies, not as a voice telling her the right thing, but as a memory of the way he set a picket straight without a level. He had closed one eye against the evening and used the horizon. She did the same. The line came true. She wiped the blade. She wiped her face. She stepped back. The cottonwoods went quiet. The whole place listened. Nothing happened. The man nodded once, as if to say that nothing was as good as something when something usually meant teeth. Then the creek sang. It came up thin at first, shy as a whistle a boy uses to get a dog's attention. Sorghum leaned into her so hard she had to plant her feet. The song slipped between fence wires and under grass and inside old nail holes, and everywhere it went, things remembered water, the windmill, the trough, the low spot that never dried, the ditch where cattails came back even when you burned them. The man said, if it asks your name, don't give it. It can ask. Her mouth had gone dust dry around the words. It doesn't know syllables, he said. It knows shapes. It'll want the one you were in the world. Don't give it that one. Give it the one you were alone when you drag a goat out of a fence at 2 a.m. because nobody else will. The song changed. It picked at the lines on Sorghum, at the cross angle, at the old road. Maris felt pressure there, a physical pushing, as if the world itself leaned curious, or hungry, or both. The donkey shivered. She put her palm where the blade had been and spoke without thinking. Stay, she told the quiet she had written. Stay. Something in the air drew back like a lip and showed a set of teeth made of cold. The man's washed-denim eyes thinned to slits. Good, he said softly, as if to a storm you've convinced to go around the barn instead of through it. The song rose. It found the stall mark from last night and ran along it like a finger. It found the new lines and slowed. It tasted. It pressed. It thinned again. Don't sing, the man warned. Whatever you do, don't answer with a tune. It likes tunes. It crawls up them like vines. Maris did not sing. She stood with her palm a blessing against Sorghum's side and thought of the old road and the winter her father had lost his way and found it again. She thought of fence lines built straight enough to shame a ruler. She thought of how her father had written diesel expenses and rainfall and the names of neighbors who paid late and were forgiven. She wasn't praying. She was remembering on purpose. The song faltered. It turned from the donkey like a fox losing interest in a shut henhouse and nosed toward the yard gate. The man said, "It's testing." It'll find the weakest mark. Where's your weakest? South fence, Maris said immediately. The corner I've put off because you can lean a panel and tell yourself it's good enough. Not tonight, it isn't. They moved as dusk bled into a color that had no good name. He carried twine and a piece of chalk. She carried the scalpel and the steadiness she'd borrowed from her father. Sorghum clomped behind them as if he had decided he belonged on this patrol. Goats chorus-lined along the fence and reconsidered when the creek's song slipped past. They backed into the pen with unified family cowardice. At the south corner, the cattle panel sagged the way lies sag when you have to look at them while saying them again. The post leaned a hand width. The ground there had sunk some, no, had let go, like the stranger said. Coyote Prince Sultan peppered the dust. Here, the man said, and drew a small cross where the panel met the post. Old road again. Maris nicked her forearm with the scalpel. A small one. Enough to make dark bloom and then slow. She pressed it to the chalk mark. He did the same to his scarred palm and laid blood over blood. It likes trades, he said. Everything alive does. You could have warned me, she said through her teeth. You already knew. She did know. Blood made a contract the way signatures made debt and vows made marriages, imperfect and binding anyway. They walked the fence and marked the low places, the fresh cracks where earth had widened its mouth from hairline to grin. Twice, the wind hissed through the cottonwoods in a way that was not wind. Twice, the creek learned the new lines and pushed and then relented the way a bully does when the principal steps into the hall. When they reached the north corner, a figure stood in the road. Not the man. Not the creek. The boy. He held his torn hood in his hand like a hat. Without it he looked even younger, the bones of his face not yet settled where they'd live the rest of his life. His hair was the color of dust and caught like the dark had done it. His mouth was set in a line so careful you could have used it for a mark. His eyes were wrong, not evil, not gone, but full of a wrong light, as if he had stood too close to a lamp that taught him shadows he wasn't supposed to learn. Go home, Maris said, sudden heat shining in her like a coal-seeing wind. I don't have one, he said without sorrow. I have the lane and the creek in his coat when it rains. He jerked his chin toward the stranger and did not take his eyes off Maris. You don't cut anything else on my place, she said. Not a goat. Not a donkey. Not my fence, not my name. It's not cutting, he said with a quiet that hurt. It's measuring. He said it like he was repeating a rule he had loved too well. Measuring without permission is stealing, she snapped. And stealing from animals is cowardice. That hit. He flinched, barely. Then his face went smooth as water left to settle overnight. You think she's going to do it right, he said to the man, never looking at him. You think people who stayed because they didn't know how to leave can learn what leaving taught you. She already knew, the man said. She just didn't have a word in her mouth for it yet. The boy's wrong-lit eyes softened a flicker. It almost made him beautiful. I want to see, he said, and Maris felt the words like a moth feels heat. You don't get to see, she said. You had your night. This one's mine. He nodded once. Obedient on the surface, coiled beneath. He stepped off the road and stood among the cattails that had sprouted out of habit in dirt that hadn't been wet in months. The creek's song picked up as if the cattails had a memory of wind moving through and wanted to imagine it back. They finished the corner. They came back to the yard as stars burned holes in the dark in their slow, precise script. The goats went to sleep arguing, and then stopped because the night took even that from them. Sorghum stood with his head over the stall door and watched as if he were an old reliability inspector hired by a company that had forgotten its own standards. Inside, the man said. Eat. Tell the body it isn't a wire you can pull tighter and tighter until it sings out of key. She made sandwiches with meat that had a right to be called meat and not water with muscle shapes. They ate leaning on the porch rail. The night rubbed its back against the house and purred or growled depending on how your bones were set to hear it. Why do you help? She asked finally, not looking at him, not ready for the cost of eye contact on that truth. I owe this land, he said. And your father. And anyone stubborn enough to love a place that won't love back unless you learn its language. Why does the boy? Because the creek answered him once when no one else did, he said. And he mistook answer for invitation. They didn't speak for a long time. The radio inside the barn clicked as it cooled, even though it had never been on. The windmill creaked a single word and then forgot it. At the edge of midnight, the creek sang again. This time it didn't come thin. It came up with confidence, with that terrible childlike glee things have when they are about to break a rule and be praised for it instead of punished. It moved along the fence line and read their marks. It came to the stall and pressed. It found the old road angle and snarled without teeth. The man stood and the boy appeared out of the cattails as if called by name, though no one had spoken. Maris moved to the barn and set her palm where the lines crossed on Sorghum's side. The donkey breathed through her wrist. "Hold," the man said. No sound. The song pushed harder. The cottonwoods leaned toward one another until their branches stitched a seam against the stars. Dirt rose in a skin along the ditch. Out past the south fence something gave with a sound like a chair pushed back from a table by someone who had decided to stand up and make a point. "Hold," the man said again, and this time the word held him, too. The song found an angle that wasn't true. Maris felt it the way a seamstress feels a wrong stitch under a fingertip after hours of right ones, small, specific, inarguable. The hip mark had drifted half a hair when she lifted her hand to wipe. She saw how the error started at intention and became geometry and became invitation. "It's there," she said through her teeth. "At the hip." The boy made a small sound she hated herself for hearing as relief. The man said nothing. He stood very still as if stillness could earn grace as well as motion. "Fix it," he said at last. "It's on skin," she said. "Not bored." "Fix it," he repeated, and his voice had the patience of a winter that knows spring will crawl to it on its stomach and say thank you. She cleaned the spot with trembling hands. Sorghum lifted a hoof and set it down again as if weighing the distance between trust and regret. She adjusted the angle in her head until it felt like the old road, then breathed until her breath was the same length as the scalpel's path. She drew. Pain flashed through the donkey and into her palm in a sympathy that felt more like an oath than a reflex. She did not apologize. She did not hesitate. She finished the line as if the creek itself had to learn that a woman with a blade and a donkey with a will could tell it where not to go. The song hit the corrected angle and broke like a wave against a reef no chart had mentioned because men stopped making charts when they stopped believing the world had reefs. It turned, angry, and darted for the south fence. "Gate," the man barked. They ran. The boy did not. He walked like a deacon down a church aisle, his face lifted as if listening to a hymn only he once loved. At the south gate the dirt had opened its mouth. Not wide. Wide was for movies. But enough for a boot to twist, for a post to lean, for a creed to falter. The song poured there the way cold pours from a freezer when a door is opened in summer. Maris flung herself to her knees and pressed her bleeding palm, she hadn't realized she'd nicked it on wire, into the chalk cross they'd made before. She put the scalpel on the earth like an offering. "Stay," she said to the quiet. "Stay." The man put his hand over hers. "Old scar on fresh blood." "Stay," he said, and the word came out of him in a note that wasn't a tune but knew music's parentage. The ground thought about it. Then the song shifted, picked up to a pitch that stripped pain off thoughts, and tore down the fence a panel over. Posts popped like ribs. Wire twanged and snapped. Goats shrieked and then forgot how. Sorghum brayed once, a sound from some older donkey who'd had to choose between fight and impossible. The man lunged for the fallen panel. The boy reached the gap at a walk that made the hair on Maris's arms rise up like grass in wind. He set his bare foot on the edge where dirt had given up inside as if stepping into a bath drawn by a mother he barely remembered. "Don't," Maris said, but he was already inside the song's mouth. The creek's voice braided with his. Not like duet. Like a knife in the whetstone meant for it. The sound sharpened until it made the air alight with invisible filings. "Out," the man said, too late and not loud enough to move time. The boy smiled with the wrong light. It knows me, he said to the night, not to them. It knows the shape of me. Then it will keep that shape, the man said, and the words were not threat but prophecy. Maris didn't think. Thinking belonged to people with luxuries like extra time. She moved. She grabbed the boy's wrist, the one with scalpel calluses, and yanked him out of the opening. He was impossibly light and impossibly heavy at once, like someone had replaced his bones with stories. Let go, he hissed, and she realized with a cold clarity that if she did let go he would step back into that mouth and be grateful for being eaten. Help me, she said to the man, and he did, one arm around the boy's chest, a hand in the collar, pulling him bodily to the yard. The song screamed once, angry, thwarted, and fled back up the creek bed so fast cattails bent as if a wind had gone the wrong way. Then there was only night and their breathing and the sound of wires settling into the truth of being broken. The boy lay on the dirt and laughed, a terrible, small laugh, the kind people make when they've been punished by something they love too much to hate. It wants me, he said. It asks for me by the name nobody else uses anymore. What name? Maris said, before she could stop herself. He told her. It wasn't a word. It was a sound like gravel under a tire and the crr of a crow and the hiss of a kettle. It was a private shape. It slid into her ear and sat down. Get up, the man said roughly. You don't give your secret to people who will live longer than your want. The boy stood with the gracelessness of sudden youth. You think this is yours now, he said to Maris. You think you put your hand on a donkey and stole a language. She bridled. I think I kept my land. For one night, he said, and his smile was almost kind in its cruelty. Listen. They did. Far down the creek, where the highway crossed above it in a concrete yawn, the song had changed key. It had found another low place and another weak mark and was working it like a tooth with a bit of sweetness stuck in it. Somebody else's fence, somebody else's yard. We can't chase it all night, the man said. This was your job. You did it. He looked at Maris then with something like respect and something like worry that fit him like his coat. You did it, and now you have to keep doing it or teach someone who can. Teach who? She said, already afraid of the answer. He glanced at the boy. No, she said immediately, the word a gate slamming. He wants wrong things. He wants to be wanted, the man said, and the boy's wrong-lit eyes flinched like a bird at a porch light. Those are different. If you give him work, he'll choose it over worship. Maris stared at the gate they'd repaired with blood and chalk and will, at the panel that lay like a broken rib off to the side, at the cottonwoods that had taken their ears down and put them away for the moment. She thought of the bank letters and of the invisible letters the creek kept writing under the ground with each small letting go. Fine, she said. But not tonight. Tonight he goes back to that lane and waits for morning like the rest of us mortals. The boy looked at the man, not at her. The man looked at the boy. Something old passed between them, like a debt tallied and partially paid. The boy nodded. He walked away with that deacon gate and did not look back. They fixed what they could in the dark because people who live here fix things in the dark or they don't get fixed. They wired the panel back enough that goats would not wake to a coyote sniffing their arguments. They walked the lines and redrew 2 small marks where the chalk had blown thin. They came to the barn and sat with Sorghum while the donkey slept and reminded himself to breathe slow. You're shaking, the man said finally. So are you, she said, which was true and felt like kindness and victory at once. Tomorrow, he said. We set stones. Stones? You can't hold a place with cuts forever. Flesh remembers and then it forgets. Stone keeps better. Your father kept a line of them in the north pasture where the creek kept remembering a ditch. I know the stones, she said. We used to trip over them when we were little and he'd say it was because we weren't watching. He wasn't talking about your feet, the man said, and that was a kind of benediction she did not know what to do with. She walked him to the yard gate and stopped him with a hand. Tomorrow, she said. We set stones. After that, you leave. This is my place. My work. He nodded. After that, I leave. He tipped his hat. You don't need my name. She didn't say that she'd already given him one in the privacy of her own head, the way a child names a stray dog it isn't going to keep. She watched him go until the Harjal lane took him from light. Then she went inside and lay down fully clothed on the couch and woke only when the goats reminded the world they existed by bleating like sorrow was a profession. Morning made liars out of nights like that. It slapped on a blue sky and pretended nothing ever sang. But the south fence told the truth in its bruises. The trough had moved inches without hands. The windmill had turned twice in a wind that hadn't blown. The stall board had a new pale scar that had not been there the day before. Anna arrived with coffee strong enough to confess to. She stood in the barn and did what good doctors do when medicine runs out. She took inventory of what was left to save. You're pale, she said to Maris. You're bossy, Maris said, and let herself be bossed into eggs and a second coffee in a chair that would hold her up while she told the truth. When she finished, Anna didn't laugh. She didn't nod, either. She put her hands on her knees and stared at the door where the morning made a square of brightness on the dirt. You want me to tell you you're making metaphors out of lack of sleep, she said. But I won't. I grew up 20 miles from here. We had a well that sang for a week when I was 9. Mama said it was wind. Daddy said it was the pipes. The dog said we were fools and slept under the bed for 8 nights in a row. Maris's mouth tried on a smile and found it didn't fit yet but would. Anna stood. I'm staying through tonight. Not to hear anything. To be here when you don't. The man arrived as the sun tilted down and made long honest truths of shadows again. He carried 3 fieldstones in a burlap sack and a sledge with a hickory handle that had been wiped so many times it looked like bone. North pasture, he said. Then south. Then the yard. Then we eat. Then we see if we've told the place what it needs to remember. They set the first stone at the old road angle under the cottonwoods. He had her lay the scalpel in a crack and then drive a wedge so that the blade became part of the rock. You won't need it after this, he said. Use knives for meat. Use words for people. Use stone for what the creek wants. She wanted very badly to keep the scalpel, the way a woman wants to keep the dress. She did a brave thing, and even when it's wrong, for every other day. But she wedged it, and the sound the steel made as it became stone was, unexpectedly, happy. Like a tool that had done its job and earned retirement. They laid 3 stones in the north pasture, 2 in the south, 1 by the barn where the boy had drawn the first pale mark. At the yard gate he had her set a small round one her father had used to hold a broken latch shut for a month one summer when everything else broke too. He knew, the man said. He just used different nouns. Dusk again. The hour when honesty comes easy and bravado goes to bed. Eat, Anna insisted, and fed them like a medic at a triage tent who knows the next hour will take what you don't put in now. Then the creek sang. It came surprised. It hit the stone at the old road and skittered up like a cat off a hot stove. It hit the south fence and found the post righted, the panel wired, the chalk refreshed. Sulking, it moved on. It nosed the yard gate and found the round stone waiting like an old woman who planned to be respected. The boy didn't appear. The night was missing that wrong light and was better for it. Maris missed him anyway and hated herself twice for that. It's looking for a door, the man said. Give it one that opens the wrong way. How? She asked, and the word carried more awe than she wanted to admit. Stand where you were when you fixed the hip angle and tell it no, he said. Not with your mouth. With your weight. She stepped to Sorghum's side. The donkey pressed his neck into her ribs and sighed in a language older than the creek and infinitely more domestic. She set her feet the way you do when someone you love is about to do something stupid and you plan to catch them without letting them know they were falling. No, she told the ground with her bones. The song rose to a childish shriek and then broke off as if embarrassed by itself. Silence fell, a better silence than last night, the kind that smells like cut hay and cooling tin and the inside of a hat hung on its hook where it belongs. Anna finally exhaled. I hate all of you, she said with huge affection, and Sorghum brayed in a way that could have been agreement. That's it, the man said after a long minute. For tonight. He looked at Maris without anything in his face but the simple fact of seeing. You held. Maris felt a warmth start in her chest and walk out to the ends of her fingers like a campfire, deciding to be generous. It wasn't victory. It was the okay that comes after a storm checks your roof and decides to go insult another county. Tomorrow, he said. I'll go. You'll go, she echoed, because saying it twice makes some things more true and some things less, and you only learn which by trying. He tipped his hat, and then the cottonwoods went quiet in a way they hadn't yet. Quiet like something holding its breath not to be seen. Maris turned toward the creek bed without knowing why. The night there had a seam in it. Not a sound. Not a light. A seam, the way a dress shows the line where a tailor hid the work if you know to look. What is that? Anna whispered, standing before she remembered she had promised herself to sit. The man did not answer. He stepped once toward the seam and stopped as if he had reached a cliff he alone could see. The seam opened. Something stepped out of the dark that wasn't the night and wasn't the creek and wasn't anything her father had taught her the name for. It was tall the way windmills are tall when you're little, and thin the way a lie is thin when you hold it up to the right light. It wore no face, and every face the creek had ever reflected when cattle came to drink. Where hands would have been it had lines, not ropes, not veins, not wires, just lines, humming. Sorghum went still enough that for a second she thought he had forgotten how to be alive. The thing looked at the stones and the cuts and the woman and the man, and then at the notebook on the workbench that she had not realized she had left open to the juniper page. It spoke without sound, and everyone there heard their own name said by someone who had known them since before. It was not holy. It was not hateful. It was simply enormous with attention. It lifted one line hand and pointed at Sorghum. Then at Maris. Then at the creek. Then at the north pasture. Then, slowly, precisely, it drew a shape in the air that Maris recognized too late, the old road angle, and a second angle she had not learned yet because it belonged to a map that hadn't been unfolded. Don't watch it, the man said softly, terror braided with awe in his voice in a way that made her believe him as deeply as she had believed anything this week. If you watch it, it will draw you back. Maris kept her eyes on Sorghum instead, on the way the old donkey's ears came halfway up as if he were preparing to forgive something that hadn't even apologized yet. The line thing finished its air drawing and touched the ground. Stone answered. Not loudly. Not with light. The sound was a click felt more than heard, like a safe closing, like a clasp catching, like a promise that had been trying to become true finally being allowed to. The scene narrowed. The line thing slid backward through it. The creek sang a single note of disappointment and then remembered to be dry. Did we win? Anna said, voice thin with the embarrassment of asking the wrong question well. We bought a day, the man said. Sometimes that's everything. Maris walked to Sorghum and kissed the place between his eyes where worry collected and evaporated by morning if a person did their work. She leaned her forehead there and let the old animal hold up some of her weight as if he were a post set true. The man picked up his sledge. He slung the burlap sack over his shoulder. He looked at the north pasture a long time, then at Maris, then at the road like a man memorizing 3 directions he will have to walk in at once some other year. Tomorrow, he said again, but softer. Tomorrow, she said, and the word felt like a handle her hand fit. Then a car came up the lane too fast. Headlights cut the yard at an angle that ignored stone and line and all the patient geometry they had spent a day teaching the place. Gravel spit. The engine beeped as a modern thing that thinks it deserves to live longer than horses does when it's put in park. The driver's door swung open and a man stepped out with a clipboard and a fluorescent vest that had never met a night like this and did not plan to. Evening, he said with the confidence of someone who arrives with letterhead behind him. Maris Wren? County Water and Infrastructure. We've got authorization to trench a relief channel across your south pasture starting sunup. Shouldn't take more than a week if we can get the excavator in. The creek, still dry, still pretending to be humble, hummed a wordless approval only Maris could hear. She tightened her hand around the porch rail until the wood remembered her father. You trench that, she said, and you'll cut every line I just drew. The man tapped his clipboard with a polite smile that had never held a dying kid goat in a storm. Ma'am, the flood maps say. Flood maps are for water that behaves, she said, stepping down into the yard where the stones were, and the donkey watched, and the man with no name held his breath because he understood exactly what this meant. Whatever you've got on that paper isn't what we've got in that creek. The county man chuckled the chuckle of small power. We've got signatures and we've got a backhoe. You've got rocks. He looked past her toward the south, where the fence showed its mended places like scars you could be proud of. If I were you, I'd be grateful. Anna's hand found Maris's elbow and squeezed once. The man with the washed denim eyes set down his sledge very carefully, like a person lowering a baby after deciding not to walk away. The county man checked his watch. Cruise at the diner. I told them to finish pie and then head on over to the Hargill Lane to make sure we can bring the rig through without bogging down. We'll be back in. He looked at his watch again and grinned in a way that wanted to be friendly, about 40 minutes to stake the path. He trod back to his truck, humming the way men hum when they think the world is going to let them do exactly what they planned. The engine lit. The tail lights washed red over the gate stone and the stall and the man and the donkey and the woman whose place this was. Don't let them dig, the man said when the dust settled. If they open a straight line from the highway to your fence, you can draw until you cut your name off your own arm and it won't hold. How do I stop a backhoe with rocks and a donkey? Maris said, not to be funny, not to be dramatic, but to put the math of the night on a board where everyone could see it. You don't, he said. You stop it with a man who remembers your father and paperwork his boss forgot he signed. He picked up the leather notebook from the bench and flipped to a page she hadn't read. A photocopy, glued and crooked, of a county easement from 20 years back, grantor, Wren, Daniel, terms, no trenching or alteration of natural run on the described parcel without consent of grantor or heirs, purpose, soil stability study, annulling language tucked into the body of bureaucrat speak like a thorn everyone had grown used to stepping over. Maris stared until the page swam. You keep copies. I told you, he said. We traded. He drew, I filed. Headlights were already dusting the far highway as the crew left the diner. Maris took the notebook, the sledge, the new steadiness in her bones, and started down the lane to meet them, heart hammering out a rhythm old as dirt and new as the seam that had opened in her yard. She didn't look back at Sorghum. If she had, she would have seen the donkey lift his head and stare toward the creek as if a voice had called him by the name nobody else knew yet. She would have seen the boy step out of the cottonwoods like a second thought turned into a plan. She would have seen the pale, surgical flash in his hand she thought she had retired to stone. She didn't. She walked toward headlights and letterhead and men who believed in straight lines. Behind her, the creek sang a single note of permission, and the boy reached for Sorghum's shoulder. And his fingers closed on air as Sorghum slid sideways with a speed no one would have credited to an old donkey. The boy's blade kissed nothing, just the space where a shoulder had been and now wasn't. Maris didn't see it. She was already halfway down the lane with the notebook under one arm and the sledge in the other, walking toward a wall of headlights and the tidy authority that liked to arrive early enough to own a morning. Anna saw it. She had lingered by the barn door because doctors learn that leaving last sometimes keeps a thing from breaking in the minute between supervision and luck. She caught the movement, the boy's hand, the donkey's slide, and was already moving when the boy recovered his balance and reached again. Hey, Anna said, voice flat and dangerous, the way you talk to a dog who has not decided yet whether it is going to bite. Drop it. The boy blinked. He hadn't expected an audience that could see him without wanting what he thought he was offering. It's not cutting, he said, almost apologetic. It's finishing. Anna took another step, palm out. I can put a person back together fast. I can't put a donkey back together fast enough for what you think you're owed. He looked at her hand as if he were measuring it. He looked at Sorghum. Something unclenched in his face, not conscience, grief. He lowered the blade a fraction. Please, Anna said, softer now, because she heard what moved under the pitch of his breath. Don't make me be the one who has to write this into a chart. The boy's mouth twisted. He dropped the scalpel into the straw, and it barely made a sound. "Thank you," Anna said, and only then breathed. Out on the lane, gravel fizzed under tires. A convoy of county pickups and one lowboy trailer with a backhoe chained like a sleeping dinosaur rolled in a soft cloud. The foreman from earlier hopped down with renewed cheer, a man who had eaten pie and found his day improved by sugar and the promise of machinery doing as it was told. "Morning, well, night still, isn't it?" he said brightly, even though the sky was tipping toward silver. "We'll just stake and flag so the crew can dig at first light." "You won't," Maris said. She set the leather notebook on the hood of his truck and opened it to the copied easement. "This says you need my consent. Consider this my lack." He laughed like she'd made a joke and leaned to read. The laugh didn't return. "Huh," he said. "Can I call this in?" "You can," Maris said. "And you will." He stepped back and thumbed his phone. Behind him, two men in vests began unloading stakes because motion is its own gospel. The man with no name walked to the nearest and took it from his hand with a politeness that had edge in it. "Hold on to those," he said. "They'd bend wrong if you put them in the ground without permission." The vested man looked at the foreman, who was frowning at a voice on the other end of the line that had begun to learn about Clause 17 in an old easement. "What's Clause 17?" one of the crew asked, scratching his neck. "It's the one that says men who think straight lines fix everything learn curves the hard way," the nameless man said absently. Maris kept her eyes on the foreman. She could almost hear the person in the county office flipping papers, calling a supervisor, remembering a retired clerk who used to keep meticulous files and never came to Christmas parties because that was how things got lost. The creak hummed. Not loud enough to make anyone say, "Did you hear that?" Loud enough to lay a tone under the tires and the men's voices, under the birds who were thinking about starting their jurisdiction. "Ma'am," the foreman said at last, "it appears that, we may need to reassess your plan," she supplied. "You need to reassess your plan." "Right," he said, grateful to have been given a word that permitted retreat. "We'll, go back to the Harjo lane, take a look from there, make sure we're not going to, you know." He made a vaguely destructive gesture that would have been comical if it weren't about her life. "You can stay at the lane," Maris said. "Stay there as long as you like." He nodded, gathered his men with the solemnity of people leaving a church before the last hymn, and climbed back into his truck. The convoy reversed in a choreography of beeping and embarrassment and left the yard as the horizon found its first light. "They'll be back," the man murmured, not a warning so much as calendar math. "I know," Maris said. "But so will I." He looked at her as if he'd expected that to cost her more than it did and was surprised to learn it didn't. They watched tail lights fade. The creek's hum relaxed into the ground like a cat settling into a sunspot. Anna walked up from the barn with the boy's shadow quiet behind her, his hands empty, his mouth a careful line. "He didn't cut," she said, "for the record and for mercy." Maris looked at the boy. "Why did you reach?" He looked at his palms. They had nick lines that matched the thin lives of fish. "Because it asked," he said simply. "And I like being asked." "That's not consent," Anna said. "That's flattery with better lighting." He glanced at her, startled into a brief, real smile that looked as if it had not practiced in a while. "You talk like the radio used to when I was little." "Lucky for you," she said dryly. "I listen better than your radio did." Maris set the notebook under her arm again. The leather felt heavier than it had an hour ago. Or she had learned what it weighed. "We set more stones after breakfast," she said. "Then we walk the south fence with a shovel. Anything that looks like a mouth, we give it teeth that bite the right way." "Teeth?" the boy asked. "Stakes," the man translated. "Buried at angles. A fence doesn't have to be strong if it's clever." Sorghum brayed from the barn, a sound that was neither complaint nor plea. It was a pronouncement, a donkey's way of saying the minute had arrived and would someone please put hay into it so the minute could be completed properly. They fed him. They fed themselves. Anna made eggs again and did not overcook them because fear had left her hands for her heart, where it belonged. After, Maris took the scalpel from the stone wedge in the yard where she had retired it and felt a pang like taking a well-used tool down from a nail one last time. She wrapped it and placed it in a jar on the shelf over the workbench. "You're done," she told it, a little foolish, and the feeling that moved through her wasn't foolish at all. It was the sincere relief of ending a necessary ugliness. The boy watched with a hunger that was almost grief. "What am I supposed to do with my hands now?" he asked, honest as a paper cut. "Carry rocks," Maris said. "Steady posts. When you want to measure, measure without blades." He looked doubtful and then, slowly, decided to try. A boy could choose a new verb. The creek wouldn't like it. He was allowed to try anyway. They set stones. The man taught, then stepped back. Anna carried water and a running line of commentary that diffused the silence when it started to tighten. The goats contributed by arguing with fence wire like it had insulted their mothers, proof that the world still held jokes. By mid-morning, the yard had become a page full of punctuation: round stone by the gate, wedge by the barn, a flat one buried at the south corner with a chalk line no rain would find for months but the creek's memory would. The boy learned to feel where to place them, not with mysticism, not with trance, but with the practical mysticism of bodies. Here the dirt packed firm under a boot, there it gave, there the ants had chosen, which meant something about drainage they couldn't say. Maris was carrying the last stone, one her father had used to weight the lid of the feed bin in summers when raccoons ran their hands through everything, when a white county pickup eased to a stop at the gate and a new man got out. He wore a shirt with buttons, not a vest, and an expression that tried to be both apologetic and in charge. "Ms. Wren," he said. "I'm Deputy Director Callahan. I understand there's some confusion about a trench." He smiled. It felt like a sack slid over a face. "No confusion," Maris said. She set the stone down on the post cap and leaned her hands on it like a podium. "You have an easement that says you don't dig without my say-so." "I don't say so." He spread his hands. "I sympathize. But the flood maps are wrong for this creek," Maris said. "And if you cut a channel straight to my fence you'll teach it a habit I can't break without buying more stones than we've got counties." "We're just trying to mitigate risk," he said gently, as if she were a fragile thing and he a polite wind. "So am I," she said. "Your way fixes a map. Mine fixes my ground." He nodded, as if she'd made a point that would get a pat on the head. "Perhaps," he said, "we can discuss a compromise. An alignment adjustment. A few feet here or there." The man with no name shifted where he stood, a small move that meant, "Not this." The boy stared at the deputy director with the intensity of someone learning the shape of a different kind of power. "No," Maris said. "Not feet. Not inches. You want to mitigate risk, you run your relief channel along the highway on the county side of the culvert and you leave my pasture to the geometry it already understands." Callahan sighed in a slow, rehearsed rhythm. "You're not the only landowner downstream." "I know," she said. "And if you dig here you'll give them trouble they don't have yet. You'll make your morning easier and their springs worse." A muscle moved in his jaw. His smile stayed on because it had to. "I'll confer with legal," he said at last. "May I see the original document?" "You may see a copy," she said, and handed him the notebook open to the glued-in page. She did not remove her thumbs from the edge. He scanned, frowned when he reached the clause half of his staff had forgotten existed, and nodded with a professionalism that almost earned him back his face. "We'll be in touch," he said. "No digging today." "No digging any day," she said. "That isn't how public works functions," he said mildly. "It is today," she said. He left with paperwork in her refusal in his pocket like a small stone he had not planned to carry. The convoy did not return. Noon took the place hostage, and then let it go in exchange for a breeze that smelled like pencil shavings and hot tin. They ate under the cottonwoods. The boy lay on his back and watched light come through leaves with the expression of someone trying to learn how to be delighted without permission. Sorghum wandered up and took a sandwich crust out of Maris's hand so delicately his whiskers told jokes about manners. "Tonight," the man said. "It will try again," because bureaucracy is a kind of song too, and it hums into the ground whether or not a shovel ever moves. Let it, Maris said. Her hands had stopped shaking. Her mind had stopped trying to fall into holes. We'll finish before dark. And if the creek sings, I'll be where I was when it learned the word no. Afternoon brought a cloud bank that looked like ambition and thought better of itself. Anna napped sitting up, the way nurses teach themselves when school hasn't yet finished teaching them the rest. The boy walked the fence as if memorizing a poem he might want to recite to himself someday. The nameless man checked stones with the quiet tenderness of an uncle who had been asked to watch until the parents got home. At sundown they touched everything they had made. The way farmers and nurses and people with a particular kind of faith do before they rest, once more, not because it's necessary but because it's decent. When night came, it came honest. The cottonwoods didn't pretend to be anything but what they were. The creek bed lay there like a scar and like a promise. The windmill remembered and then forgot the word it liked to say. Then the song rose. It came from farther down than before, as if the creek had taken the advice of a committee and decided to try the back door. It nosed along the ditch that fed the Hargill lane. It found the stones they'd laid and pressed them the way teeth pressed the tongue to test the sore spot again. It slid to the yard and found the round gate stone waiting. Maris stood where she had stood, palm on Sorghum's shoulder at the crossline, feet set like a woman telling company they'd had enough and should go home now without dessert. Anna stood at the barn door with both hands in fists because that was as close as she would come to holding a gun and she had made her peace with that. The boy stood by the south fence, his face turned toward the culvert, and listened with a new expression, not hunger, not devotion, distrust, like a kid learning he had been praised into doing chores that weren't his. The song tested the hip angle. It found its correction. It moved to the shoulder and found the old road waiting like an elder who had stopped being patient and started being firm. It slipped to the south and looked for the panel it had torn last night and found it wired, braced, stone at its base like a jaw set against a blow. It tried the lane. The boy flinched, not toward it, this time, away. It says my name, he whispered, and the whisper broke without crying. It says the small one. The one from before. Then give it a new one, Anna said, as if that were an ordinary prescription she could write on a pad, take one new self twice daily with food. What would I be? He asked, desperation fresh and raw. Useful, Maris said. That's a name. He looked at her as if she'd offered him a coat that fit when he'd grown used to cold. He nodded, shaking, and set his hands on the fence like a man accepts a job. The creek slid its song under the gate in a throatier key. Sorghum's ears went flat. Maris leaned into him and felt the old donkey lean back like a brace. The seam opened again. The line thing rose, taller, its hands brighter with humming. It looked at the new stones and at the boy and at the nameless man, and then it turned its attention to the leather notebook on the workbench, as if it could smell what paper can do to a place. Don't watch it, the man said again, though the plea in his voice had been replaced by a recognition. There are some things you can only tell people once, and after that they must carry their own eyes. Maris kept her gaze on Sorghum. Stay, she said to the quiet. Stay. The line thing lifted a hand and traced an angle in the air she hadn't learned. It looked like the angle of a child's elbow when he sleeps on a car seat and the road turns. It looked like the way the wind leans into cottonwoods just before the first drop of a storm. It looked like what her father's spine had done the winter he decided to walk out into the white and didn't come back. She knew it without knowing how to name it. She moved her hand to the place halfway between shoulder and heart and pressed. Here, she said to the boy. Mark here. He had no blade. He had a piece of chalk from the pocket where the man kept it like a talisman. He reached across the fence, touched the chalk to his palm, and then to the post, and drew that angle as if he'd been waiting for permission to do it the kind way. The line thing touched the ground. Stone spoke again. Louder. The sound didn't come with light or wind. It came with a sudden, profound stillness, the stillness of a room when someone stops a fan and everyone realizes how much of their lives they have spent ignoring noise. The song faltered. The scene narrowed. The boy swayed. Anna caught him by the elbow and didn't let go. The man put his palms flat on the porch rail and bowed his head as if he'd been invited to survive and accepted. The line thing receded. The creek went quiet in that wary way braggarts do when they realize the room isn't theirs anymore. For a time made of breath and exhausted bones, nothing happened. Sorghum chewed hay with the gravity of a judge satisfied by testimony. The cottonwoods let go the breath they'd been holding for a day and a night and another day. The windmill found its one rusty word and said it and then slept. "Is it done?" Anna asked, softer than before, because something enormous had just refused to be named. "For now," the man said. "For now," the boy repeated, and the phrase slid into him like a spine where there hadn't been one. "Not forever. For now. A day a person could choose." They stood in the yard like victors who knew better than to build statues. Headlights sprang on the highway. A single set, not a convoy. The county truck returned, but this time it rolled slow, with a different driver, and stopped at the gate without presenting itself as anything but a vehicle bringing a man who had thoughts. Callahan stepped out. He had no clipboard. He had a manila envelope. He held it like he didn't want to get it dirty. "Ms. Wren," he said. "I spoke with legal. The easement holds. We will not be trenching across your pasture." He took a breath that tasted like crow. "We'll approach from the county side and cut a relief channel that dies into the culvert before it touches private land. You may not like that either." "It's your dirt," she said. "You sing to it however you like." He looked at the stones, at the posts, at the donkey who watched him as if he were being introduced to the committee. "Whatever you're doing out here," he said, and it wasn't admiration, not exactly, it was stunned acceptance of encountering a world that had not required his signature. "Keep doing it. We'll stay out of your way." He set the envelope on the gate post. "Letter on county letterhead for your records. And a copy of your father's easement, in case this notebook makes someone think you've got a forgery." He flushed. "Not that I did." "You did," the man said mildly, and Callahan didn't argue. He left. The highway resumed being a string the county plucked and pretended was music. The yard resumed being a place people had made and refused to surrender. Maris took the envelope and the copy and put them with the notebook in a drawer she had cleared of things she had kept for no good reason for far too long. Closing it felt like making a small but durable promise to herself she would not break before breakfast. The nameless man picked up his sledge and his burlap sack without drama. "I said I'd go tomorrow," he said. "It's tomorrow." She nodded. "Before you do," she said, "tell me something true I don't want to know." He considered, then said, "Every place has a song. Most are lullabies. Some are hunger. You can't change the words. You can change what sings along." She nodded because she had already learned that and needed it said out loud anyway. "And tell me something hopeful that isn't a lie." "You said a line," he said quietly, "and people showed up to hold it with you. That's not magic. That's the only thing that works." He tipped his hat to Anna. "Doctor." He tipped it to the boy. "Useful." He tipped it to Sorghum last, and the old donkey allowed it as if to say he had been thanked properly at last. He turned to go. "Wait," Maris said, and he did, because men who keep their word are often best at waiting, too. "What was my father to you? Friend? Partner? Fool?" "Teacher," he said, and that surprised her. "He taught me that patterns that hold aren't the ones people talk about. They're the ones people live in. He taught me to eat what was on the table before reaching for what I wanted. He taught me that the worst thing about a storm isn't the wind. It's the way it tells you you're small. And that the best answer to small isn't to get big. It's to get many." He touched 2 fingers to the brim and took the Harjil lane without looking back. The boy watched him go like a son learning how to bless a leaving that chose to leave right. Dawn came clean and unapologetic. The goats resumed their profession as loud moralists. The highway put on its daytime voice. The creek kept quiet in the way of a thing deciding whether to try again today or to spend itself at some other fence where nobody had laid a stone. Work followed, as it always does. Fences, water lines, a stubborn gate hinge, hey, a patch of roof that had stopped pretending it would behave without attention. Anna drove to the clinic and back twice, bringing vaccines and a phone charger and a slow cooker full of something green that wanted to be soup and was forgiven for being stew because everyone was tired. The boy vanished for hours and returned with a coil of used wire, 3 abandoned fence pickets, and 2 flat stones you could ride on with rain. He unloaded them without ceremony and set about mending a corner he had not been asked to mend. He did not pick up a blade. When he reached into his pocket out of habit, he found chalk instead, and considered that fact until it stuck. Around noon, Pete Calder from the feed store drove up in his dust-colored truck and sucked at his teeth as if that could pull gossip into his mouth. "Heard the county backed off," he said, half admiring, half resentful, because men like Pete resented what they admired if it didn't come on a tractor. "They did," Maris said. "What did you do?" he asked. "Call in a favor." "I read," she said. "And I insisted." He grunted. "Folks around here don't insist enough. I tell my wife that all the time." "Tell her less," Anna advised mildly from behind him, and Pete had the grace to smile and accept the prescription. "Your daddy would be proud," he said as he climbed back in. He loved this place more than it loved him. "It loves me back," Maris said, and surprised herself by believing it. He stared at her like she'd said the fence had complimented her shirt and then nodded because men nod when they don't know what else to do. By late afternoon, clouds that had failed at rain decided to try light instead. The cottonwoods went the color of fresh brass. The creek kept its counsel. The backhoe on the county side of the culvert dug a neat, obedient channel that ended short and didn't look at her fence like it wanted to flirt. The boy took the jar down from the shelf and handed Maris the wrapped scalpel without unwrapping it. "Keep it or bury it," he said. "But don't give it back to me." "I won't," she said, and put it in the drawer with the papers. "Do you have a place to sleep that isn't an idea?" He considered. "I have the lane," he said. "And the creek when it talks." "Not good enough," she said. "You can take the old tack room if you'll do the work that comes with a door." He blinked. "What work?" "Fix the hinge. Sweep. Ask before you use the radio. Bring water to the goats when you water yourself. Tell the truth. If you can't tell the truth, tell me you can't. If you can't do either, leave." He weighed the terms like a man reading a contract written in a language he hadn't known he spoke until someone offered him a pen. "I can do that," he said. "I think." "That's all anybody gets," she said. Thinking. He moved into the tack room with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to own little and the surprise of someone who had not expected to be allowed to own even that. Anna left extra blankets and pretended she'd miscounted them on inventory. The man did not return, but sometimes when the wind came from the Hargel lane it carried the smell of old canvas and tobacco that had been quit long enough to be a memory. Evening came again. They walked the lines once more because habits become rituals and rituals become spells you can cast without a wand. The stones were stones. The fences were fences. The creek had the look of a child caught with a hand in the sugar, unrepentant, but clever enough to wait until the kitchen was empty. They ate on the porch. Sorghum put his head on Maris's shoulder and dozed like an old dog who had decided the world could be forgiven for now. The boy fell asleep on the step with his hands open, palms to the sky, and there were no knives in them, only calluses he had not earned yet but would. "Do you ever get to rest?" Anna asked the air, which was the same as asking God in that county. "Between songs," Maris said. "Maybe." The cottonwoods agreed. The windmill let itself be decorative. The goats dreamed arguments and won all of them. In the middle of the night, when old fear wakes and checks whether the door is latched, the creek sang once, a single note like a throat being cleared, and then stopped, as if remembering that the room had changed. In the morning, Maris found the manila envelope on the porch rail and inside it a short handwritten note from Callahan with a phone number and a line: "If anyone from my office forgets the easement again, call me. Please." It felt like a stone, too, and she put it with the others in the drawer. Summer carried its share of small troubles to the doorstep because that is the job of seasons. A goat bloated and untangled. A pump quit and was coaxed into penance. A fence sagged and was shamed into uprightness with a shovel and a curse spoken kindly. The creek sulked and sang and sulked again and learned the shape of the stones as if they had always been there. The boy learned to listen without kneeling. He learned that measuring could be done with eyes and time and the patience to watch ants build after rain. He learned that chalk on a post is quicker than blood and lasts long enough when you're naming quiet, not worship. He learned that asking was not the same thing as owning and that every yes carried a leash you were allowed to love as much as you loved the freedom it purchased. Anna learned the paths through the yard where a woman could carry worry and set it down for a few steps. She learned the goat who lied and the one who told truth. She learned that her voice could still a boy's hand without becoming a prayer. Maris learned that authority does not have to sound like the county or the creek. Sometimes it sounds like a woman saying no with her bones. Sometimes it sounds like the click stones make when they agree to be a wall. Sometimes it sounds like an old donkey choosing to stand where he is because someone he trusts has asked him to, and trust is its own geometry. On a Tuesday that felt like all the other days until it didn't, a storm did what storms do. It stacked the horizon like plates and sent wind ahead like a busboy to clear the table. The first rain hit like thrown rice, then it hit like thrown gravel, then it hit like water does when it has learned relief. The creek filled, not sang, filled, with honest brown that wanted to go somewhere and had the good manners to stay in the bed they had insisted it keep. Water lapped the stones and respected them. It nosed the south fence and recalled last night's argument and decided to save it for court. It nipple-bit the gate stone and found it old and therefore not to be bullied. It went under the culvert, into the county's relief channel, and away. When the rain stopped, the yard smelled like pennies and cut stems. Sorghum shook himself and looked 10 years younger. The boy ran laughing along the fence line as if he had invented the idea of dry feet. Anna stood with her hands in her back pockets the way fathers stand when they are pretending not to be proud enough to cry. Maris leaned on the porch rail and let the air touch her face the way she wished certain people would and never had. She said, out loud, to the man who wasn't there and to the father who was, we held. The wind took it and filed it with the other records of the day. That night, when the frogs tried on voices they'd been saving, the creek sang one low note of acknowledgement that wasn't surrender so much as respect. The line thing did not come. The seam did not open. The stones did what stones do, they stayed. Months later, the county sent a letter printed off a machine and signed by a deputy who had never been to her gate. It affirmed the easement and warned that in extreme events extraordinary measures might be required. She put it in the drawer with the note, the copy, and the scalpel wrapped in its oily rag. She closed the drawer and baked bread because bread is a line, too, and it holds the quiet in a house like a charm. When winter came, mild for once, she took the boy to the north pasture where the stones lay and the stage road used to cross. She showed him how the grass bent a degree different there, how rabbits ran the old diagonal when they were spooked. She told him he could go if he wanted to and meant it. He looked at the lane and at the creek and at the barn and said, I'm not done measuring with chalk. Good, she said. Neither am I. The man did not come back that winter. She did not need him to. But some mornings, with fog low like a blanket and the windmill mumbling to itself, she would find a small legal form slipped under the gate stone, copy of a new county directive, or a land survey confirmation, or a note that said simply, West Fence, watch and march. She never saw him leave them. The lines held anyway. On the first anniversary of the night the creek learned no, Sorghum stood in the yard with the dignity of old creatures who know they have outlived several kinds of foolishness. Maris pressed her forehead to his and said thank you in the language they had taught each other. He took it as if it were hay and made it into himself. Pete Calder stopped by to sell her 3 bales and an opinion and left with an opinion he hadn't expected, that sometimes women who don't shout are the loudest people in a county. He told this to his wife, who said, imagine that, and handed him a hammer because the porch step had been waiting years for his insistence. Anna sat on the porch and looked at the creek and did the thing good doctors do when there is a lull. She allowed herself to feel tired. You going to keep teaching him? She asked, nodding toward the boy, who was showing the goat that the world contained carrots and that this was a reason for civilization. As long as he wants to learn, Maris said. As long as he wants to belong to something that isn't hungry. You ever going to tell me the man's name? Anna said, not hopeful, but a friend is allowed to ask. No, Maris said. Not because I don't know it. Because it doesn't help the story I have to tell myself to sleep. Anna smiled. Fair. The creek whispered then, not in demand, not in petition, like a neighbor saying good evening across a hedge. Maris raised her hand without thinking and the whisper went on by. That was respect, too. The boy came up the steps 2 at a time. The goats like me now, he said, breathless with a kind of triumph that didn't require conquest. Not because of the creek. Because of carrots, Anna said. He nodded, earnest. And because I keep promises. That's all anybody asks, Maris said. That, and for you to fix the hinge you said you'd fix before supper. He groaned and grinned and ran for the tack room because belonging is heavy and sweet and people run toward it when they realize it might be waiting. That night, the creek did not sing. The wind said its one word and then quit. The stars spelled the same old story that always ends with someone trying to read it wrong. The stones kept quiet. The lines held. The world stayed inside its bed just enough to let a woman sleep. Maris went to the door before she turned off the porch light and looked out at the yard she owned twice now, once by paper and once by work. She thought of her father writing weather in diesel and the names of neighbors who paid late and were forgiven. She thought of the man in the canvas coat and the boy with chalk on his fingers where knives had been. She thought of a donkey old enough to be a story and a creek old enough to be a god and decided neither was either. Both were hers to live with. She clicked the light and let the dark belong to the dark. In the morning, she would get up and draw no lines and all the lines at once, by feeding, by mending, by reading a letter and answering it with a knock on a door, by saying no and yes in the right places with her bones. She would keep the quiet because keeping is a verb. For now, she slept. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.